The auction yard smelled of sweat and shame, and out there in the blistering sun, where the wagons circled like vultures, a boy stood on a block of wood. His ribs were sharp little knives under his shirt. The men gathered around weren't there for cattle. They were there for him. His name, if he ever had one, was gone, lost to the wind and the dust. The auctioneer didn't care. He just barked out the boy's worth with a laugh that could cut you. "Scrawny, but he's young," the man shouted, wiping his brow. "Might fetch firewood. Scare off a coyote or two. Who'll give me $1 for the boy?" The laughter that followed was low and mean. Ranchers who could break a horse with one hand turned away, not willing to spend a single good coin on a bag of skin and bones. The boy just stood there, barefoot, silent, staring straight ahead. His face was a mask, too old for his years, and his hands were clenched into tiny fists at his sides, like he was holding on to the only thing in the world they couldn't take from him. The story in town was he'd been found wandering the canyons, half dead but too stubborn to beg. Or maybe he was the last of some forgotten family, left behind when sickness tore through the mining camps up north. Nobody knew, and nobody cared enough to ask. The bidding was going nowhere, just dead silence and the buzzing of flies. Then from the edge of the crowd, a figure stepped forward, small but steady as a coming storm. It was Clara Evans, the quiet rancher, a woman whose words were rarer than summer rain. She raised her hand. The whole town of Dust Creek turned to stare. A woman in worn boots and a sun-bleached coat, bidding where all these strong men had passed. "He's mine," she said. Her voice was as calm as the flat plains. A single silver dollar sat in her palm. Clean. Final. The auctioneer blinked. He looked from the coin to her face, not sure if he should laugh or take it. But no other hands went up. He slammed his gavel down with a thud that echoed in the sudden quiet. Sold. The crowd parted like the sea as Clara walked through. Her boots kicked up dust that seemed to speak louder than all their whispers. She reached the boy, didn't even flinch. She just offered him a hand. It was a hand rough from fence posts and wild colts, not a hand that made soft promises. For a second, the boy didn't move. He just stared at her hand, like he was waiting for the kindness to curdle, to turn into a fist. But it didn't. So he placed his own thin, dirty hand in hers, and together they walked away from the auction block. They walked away from the jeers and the whispers, leaving it all behind in the settling dust. As they walked out of Dust Creek, their shadows stretched long and thin behind them. No one followed. No one called them back. They were alone under a sky too wide to hide from. Clara Evans didn't say a word. Some wounds, you see, don't need words. They need quiet. The boy walked beside her, his shoulders pulled in tight, his bare feet stirring the dry earth. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, like a colt expecting a whip, not a gentle hand. They climbed the ridge where the wind finally softened, and there, tucked between two rocky slopes, was her ranch. It was humble, worn. A single oak tree stood guard beside the porch. She led him through the gate. Chickens scattered. The door creaked open like it had been waiting for them. Inside, it smelled of old coffee and pine soap. A little warmth still lingered in the hearth from the morning fire. Clara pointed to a bench by the kitchen table. She set down her hat and without a word ladled a thick stew into a chip bowl. She didn't wait for a thank you. The boy sat stiff as a board, just staring at the food. He looked at it like it might vanish if he blinked. Then slowly, with fingers that were more bone than flesh, he pulled the bowl close. He ate in small, careful bites, watching her from under his dusty eyelashes the whole time. She asked him nothing, not his name, not his past, not why a whole town of men had let him stand there, ready to be thrown away. When the bowl was empty, she just said, "Chores are at first light, sleep is now." He nodded. He couldn't tell if it was an order or an act of kindness. He followed her down a narrow hall to a spare cot under a window. The quilt was patched and worn, but it was clean. She left him there, closing the door soft against the dark. The boy lay perfectly still, listening. He was waiting, waiting for the kindness to finally run out, waiting for the shouting to begin, for the hands to strike. But the only sound was the wind, rustling through the trees outside the window pane. In the other room, Clara sat by the fire, mending a shirt by the light of a lamp. She wasn't thinking about the boy she'd saved. She was thinking about tomorrow's work. She hadn't brought him home to heal him. She'd brought him home because no one else would. Or so she told herself. But as she stitched the worn fabric, she glanced at the closed door. There was something in the boy's eyes she recognized. A haunted look. A look that said he'd seen things a child should never see. She shook her head, pushing the thought away. Pity had no place here. Mercy built the walls of this house, and mercy was a harder thing. It was practical. It was about survival. But that night, as a starving boy fell asleep without wondering who would own him in the morning, Clara couldn't shake a cold feeling. She had a feeling that bringing him here hadn't ended a story. It had just started a much more dangerous one. Morning broke sharp and cold. Clara was up before the rooster, pulling on her boots. She met the boy at the door, but she didn't greet him with a soft smile. She handed him a pair of boots. They were too big, but they were whole. Then she just nodded toward the corral, where the fence rails leaned tired against the wind. No speeches, no questions about how he slept. Just work, honest and steady. They spent the morning repairing the eastern fence. Clara hammered the rails into place with a rhythm born of years. The boy gathered the stray boards. His thin frame was stiff, not just from the cold, but from a lifetime of uncertainty. With every swing of her hammer, he'd flinch just a little, waiting for a correction that never came. The day settled into a pattern. Feed the chickens, haul the water, brush the horses. He did every task with a quiet focus, his eyes darting around, taking everything in. He wasn't just working, he was watching. He was learning. He noticed things. The way Clara always faced the trail when she sat on the porch. The way she kept a loaded rifle leaning just inside the door, not in a gun rack, but right there, where she could grab it fast. The way she sometimes stood at the edge of the property at sunset, just staring out at the vast empty plains to the north. At midday, they ate bread and beans on the porch. The wind stretched quiet across the ridge. When he finished his portion, she passed him another slice of bread without a word. Down below, Dust Creek was stirring with whispers. A fool, some called her, taking in a boy too thin to even lift a shovel right. But others whispered darker things. They said no woman lives alone on a ridge like that without a reason, and no child just appears out of nowhere without bringing a history with him, a history someone might come looking for. Clara paid it no mind. She knew the prairie didn't care about gossip, and fences didn't mend themselves. That night, the sky was on fire with stars. She found the boy sitting on the porch step, his knees pulled up to his chest, just staring out into the darkness. She stood behind him in the doorway for a long moment before she spoke. "You got a name worth keeping?" she asked, her voice quiet. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, filled only by the chirping of crickets. Then so low she almost missed it, he said, "Daniel." She nodded once. "Daniel, it is then." She turned to go back inside, but then she stopped. "Daniel," she said, her back still to him. "You ever been around horses before?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am." "Good," she said, and walked inside, leaving him there under the stars. Daniel sat there, confused. Good. Why was it good that he knew nothing about horses? It was a strange thing to say. A puzzle, just like the rifle by the door. Just like her long, silent stares into the empty north. A boy who was once sold like cattle was starting to feel what it meant to be his own. But he was also starting to feel something else. A deep, cold sense of dread. He had a feeling that he hadn't been rescued. He'd been recruited. The quiet on the Evans ranch couldn't keep the whispers of Dust Creek from rolling up the ridge. The rumors grew thicker than storm clouds. And by the end of the week, they brought a visitor. Paul Granger, the feed merchant, rode his wagon up the trail. He wasn't just delivering supplies. He was delivering questions he didn't even try to hide. He found Clara and Daniel fixing the west fence. Clara had her sleeves rolled up, her arms lean and strong. Daniel was driving posts into the hard ground, his shoulders still thin, but his movements getting surer every day. Granger tipped his hat with a lazy grin, but his eyes were sharp. They weren't looking at Clara. They were fixed on Daniel. "Morning, Clara," he said, his voice slick as snake oil. "See, you got your dollar's worth of help." Clara didn't stop her work. She just wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her glove. He earns his keep, Paul, Granger chuckled. He leaned against his wagon, hooking his thumbs in his suspenders. Oh, I'm sure he does. But the folks in town, they're wondering, why take in a stray when the almshouse has room? A woman alone? It's a lot of charity to be handing out. Daniel kept his head down, but his hands tightened on the post driver. He could feel Granger's eyes on him, sizing him up. It wasn't curiosity. It was something else. Something that made the hairs on his arm stand up. A ranch runs better, Clara said, her voice steady as a rock, when the folks working it know they're wanted, not just owned. Granger's smile tightened. Mercy don't fatten cattle, Clara, and it don't pay off debts. He looked straight at Daniel then, his voice dropping a little. Some things, some people, they come with debts already attached. You be careful, that boy ain't one of them. He pushed himself off the wagon, tipped his hat again, and rode off. The dust his wagon kicked up seemed to hang in the air for a long, long time. Back at the fence line, the silence was heavy. Daniel finally looked at Clara. What debts? He asked. Clara stared at the trail where Granger had disappeared. Her jaw was tight. Dust Creek is full of men who mind other people's business because they are too scared to mind their own, she said. But it wasn't an answer. Not really. It was a deflection. Daniel knew it. He'd spent his life learning to read the things people didn't say. That night, after a silent dinner, Clara finally asked him, What do you remember, Daniel, before the auction? So he told her. He spoke of the mining camp, of the sickness that came fast and quiet, stealing his mother in the night, of the hunger that finally chased him south. He told her about the cold nights and the hands that grabbed instead of guided. He told her everything he thought was the truth. Clara listened. She didn't interrupt. She just let the quiet spaces between his words hang in the air. When he was done, she got up and stoked the fire. A hard start doesn't mean a hard end, she said. Her back was to him, but as she stood there, the firelight caught something on the mantelpiece Daniel had never really looked at before. It was a small framed photograph, a man with kind eyes and a wide smile, standing with his arm around a woman. The woman was younger, but her face was unmistakable. It was Clara. And standing in front of them, holding the man's hand, was a little boy, a boy with Daniel's eyes. Outside, the wind howled over the ridge. It sounded like it was trying to carry away a secret. Inside the small cabin, Daniel stared at the photograph, his heart pounding in his chest. A hard start doesn't mean a hard end. Her words echoed in his head, but he was starting to think his start wasn't just hard. It was a lie, and the woman who bought him for $1 knew it all along. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling. The image of the photograph burned into his mind. The boy in the picture. It couldn't be him. Could it? He had no memory of that man, or of Clara looking like that. Sickness could steal memories, couldn't it? The thought circled in his head like a vulture. The next morning he tried to act normal, but every time he looked at Clara, he was searching her face for answers. She gave him none. She was the same as always, quiet, steady, her eyes revealing nothing. But Daniel was watching now. And when you're watching, you start to see things you missed before. He saw the way she cleaned and oiled the rifle by the door every single evening, her movements practiced and sure. He saw how, when a rider appeared on the distant ridge, she would stop whatever she was doing, her hand instinctively going to the small pistol he now noticed she wore, tucked into the back of her waistband. One afternoon, she sent him to the barn to organize the tool shed. It was a place he'd been in a dozen times, but now he looked at it with new eyes. Tucked away in the darkest corner, behind a stack of old saddles, was a wooden chest. It was heavy, and it was locked. It wasn't a tool chest. It felt different, more personal. He knew he shouldn't, but he had to. He found a crowbar and pried the lock open. The wood splintered with a groan that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet barn. Inside, the chest was filled with papers, old maps of the Northern Territories covered in handwritten notes, bundles of letters tied with string, and at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal. He opened it. The handwriting was a man's, strong and clear. It was a geologist's log. It detailed a survey of the very same mining camp Daniel had come from. The entries described the rock formations, the soil, the promise of a rich vein of silver. The last entry was dated 2 years ago. It read, "I've found it. A vein richer than anyone dreamed. But Granger knows. He's bringing the owner up tomorrow. Something feels wrong. He watches me. He watches my family. I told Sarah to take Daniel and run if I'm not back by sunrise." Sarah. That was his mother's name. Daniel's hands started to shake. He frantically flipped through the pages, but there were no more entries. The rest of the journal was blank. He dug deeper into the chest. Under the journal was a folded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Tragedy at Black Fork Mine. Cave-in kills dozens. Lone survivor a young boy." The article described a tragic accident, a structural failure. It named the head geologist as the man responsible for the faulty survey. It said he had fled and was presumed dead. The name of the geologist was Thomas Evans, Clara's brother, and the man in the photograph on the mantel, his father. The barn started to spin. The sickness. There was no sickness. It was a cave-in, a lie. His whole life, the story he carried inside him, was a lie. And Granger, the feed merchant, wasn't just a nosy neighbor. He was there, at the mine. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind him. Daniel spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Clara was standing in the doorway. Her face was a mask of stone. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the open chest. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Before Daniel could say anything, a sound cut through the air. The sharp, frantic barking of the ranch dogs. Clara's head snapped up. Her eyes went from the chest to the trail leading up to the ranch. 3 riders were coming. They were coming fast. And in the fading light, Daniel could see the glint of rifle barrels. "Get inside," Clara hissed, pulling the pistol from her waistband. "Get the rifle. Now." Daniel was frozen for a second, his mind reeling from the truth he'd just unearthed. His father, a murder, a lie. And now this. The riders weren't visitors. They were here to finish a job they'd started 2 years ago. They were here for him, the last witness. The quiet crackle of the fireplace was the only sound in the small cabin. Daniel sat at the table, the rifle heavy across his lap. Clara stood by the window, peering out into the moonless night. The riders had circled the ranch and then disappeared back down the trail, spooked by the dogs and the sight of Clara in the doorway, with a pistol leveled at them. For now they were gone, but they would be back. "They know you're here," Clara said, her voice flat. She finally turned away from the window and looked at him. Her face was tired, etched with lines of a fight she'd been fighting alone for 2 years. "They've been looking for you ever since the cave-in." Daniel found his voice. It was hoarse. "You knew, the whole time, at the auction. You knew who I was." She nodded, sinking into the chair opposite him. "I've been searching for you, Daniel. I rode through every burnt-out camp and run downtown from here to the territories. When I heard about an orphan boy at the Dust Creek auction, one who came from the north, I had to see for myself." The pieces were clicking into place, sharp and painful. "My father, your brother, he didn't run, did he?" "No," she said softly. "He was murdered. He discovered that the mine owner, a man named Silas Croft, was planning to fake the cave-in. Croft wanted to kill the workers, collect the insurance money, and then claim the silver vein your father found as a new discovery. Your father was going to expose him. So Croft and his men, Granger among them, silenced him. They silenced everyone." A memory, blurry and dark, surfaced in Daniel's mind. Men arguing in a small shack. His father's voice angry. Another man's voice cold and cruel. A loud noise. Then darkness. I think I saw it," he whispered. "I was hiding. Under the floorboards. I saw Granger." Clara's eyes locked onto his. "What else did you see, Daniel? Think." He closed his eyes, pushing past the fear. He remembered the smell of whiskey and cigar smoke. He remembered his father shoving a small, heavy object into his pocket just before the argument started. A rock, a strange, dark rock with glittering streaks running through it. "He gave me something," Daniel said, his eyes flying open. "A rock. He told me it was proof. He said not to lose it, no matter what. Clara leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Where is it? Do you still have it? Daniel frantically searched his memory. The chaos after the explosion. Running. Being found by strangers. The journey south. He had nothing, no possessions. Except, he reached into the pocket of the tattered trousers he'd been wearing at the auction. His fingers closed around something small, smooth and heavy. He'd kept it all this time without even knowing why. A habit, a connection to a past he didn't understand. He pulled it out and placed it on the table between them. It was a lump of dark quartz, shot through with thick, unmistakable veins of pure silver. It wasn't just a rock, it was the heart of the mountain. It was the proof that could ruin Silas Croft. And it was the reason those men outside wanted him dead. Suddenly, a sound from outside shattered the silence. Not riders this time. Something else. The frantic bleating of sheep from the lower pasture, followed by a bright orange glow that lit up the night sky. They're trying to draw us out, Clara said, grabbing her rifle. They've set the barn on fire. Daniel looked from the silver ore on the table to the flames licking at the sky. They weren't just coming for him anymore. They were coming to burn everything Clara had built to the ground. She had bought him for $1, not just to save him, but because he was the key to getting justice for her family. But in doing so, she had painted a target on her own back. And now the fire was spreading. The fire was a diversion. They both knew it. Stay here, Clara ordered, her face grim in the flickering orange light. Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone. She slipped out the back, moving like a shadow toward the burning barn. Daniel rushed to the front door, slamming the heavy wooden bar into place. His heart was a drum against his ribs. He could hear shouting outside now, men's voices carried on the wind. They weren't at the barn. They were here, at the house. A heavy fist slammed against the door. We know you're in there, boy. We just want what you took. Give us the rock and we'll leave the woman be. It was Granger's voice. A lie. They wouldn't leave anyone be. Daniel backed away from the door, clutching the rifle. He looked at the silver ore sitting on the table, gleaming in the firelight. That rock had gotten his father killed. It had made him an orphan, and now it was going to get Clara killed too. The wood of the door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. Once, twice. The bar was groaning, splintering. They were coming in. He was a boy, not a fighter. He didn't know how to use a rifle, not really. Clara had taught him to shoot at bottles, not men. His hands were slick with sweat. He was trapped. Then he remembered something. The photograph. His father's kind eyes. Clara's fierce protection. They hadn't given up. He wouldn't either. He looked around the small cabin, his eyes darting from the weak door to the sturdy stone fireplace. An idea sparked in his mind. A desperate, crazy idea. The chimney. It was wide enough. Just barely. He grabbed the rock from the table, shoving it deep into his pocket. He scrambled onto a chair, then onto the mantelpiece. The stone was rough and hot against his hands. He pulled himself up into the black, smoky throat of the chimney, his boots finding purchase on the jagged stones. Above him, a small square of starry sky. Below, the sound of the door finally giving way with a tremendous crash. Men poured into the cabin. He's not here, Granger yelled. Check the other rooms. Find him. Daniel held his breath, pressing himself against the soot-covered stones. He could hear them tearing the small house apart. He started to climb. It was slow, agonizing work. The soot was thick, choking him. His fingers, raw and bleeding, scraped against the stone. He could hear them directly below him now. The chimney, one of them said. He might have gone up the chimney. A gunshot exploded in the confined space below. The bullet whizzed past his head, ricocheting off the stone with a scream of sound. Panic seized him. He scrambled faster, his boots slipping. He was going to fall. He was going to die right here, in this dark, narrow space. But then his hand found the top edge. He pulled himself up, gasping, and rolled out onto the rough wooden shingles of the roof. The cool night air hit his face. The barn was an inferno, casting terrifying dancing shadows all around him. He saw Clara, crouched behind the water trough, firing her pistol at two of Croft's men who were trying to circle around the house. She hadn't seen him. He was exposed, a sitting duck. He had to get off the roof. He crawled to the back of the house where the roof sloped down low over the porch. He swung his legs over the edge and dropped, landing hard in the dirt. He stumbled, but kept his feet. He had to get to Clara. He had to help her. He started to run, keeping low to the ground, the rifle clutched in his hands. But as he rounded the corner of the house, he ran straight into a man. It wasn't one of the riders. It was Sheriff Alder. He was standing there, a shotgun in his hands, his face pale in the firelight. For a moment, Daniel felt a surge of relief. The law was here. They were saved. But the sheriff wasn't looking at the men attacking the ranch. He was looking at Daniel, and the barrel of his shotgun was pointed straight at Daniel's chest. "Sorry, kid," the sheriff said, his voice full of a regret that didn't reach his eyes. "Croft pays better than the county." The betrayal hit Daniel harder than a punch. The one man who was supposed to uphold the law, the man who was supposed to represent justice in Dust Creek, was on Croft's payroll. They were completely and utterly alone. Behind the sheriff, Granger appeared out of the shadows, a nasty grin spreading across his face. "Nowhere left to run, boy. Give me the rock." Daniel's mind was racing. Clara was pinned down. The sheriff had him cornered. It was over. But then he remembered his father's words from the journal. "He watches my family." His father had known they were in danger. He wouldn't have just left them. He would have had a plan, an escape. The cellar. Under the house, there was a small storm cellar. Clara had shown it to him once. The entrance was hidden under a bearskin rug in the main room. But there was another way out. A narrow tunnel that led to the old, dried-up well behind the barn. His father must have dug it, a secret way out. It was their only chance. "Okay," Daniel said, raising his hand slowly. He tried to keep his voice from shaking. "You win. The rock is inside, on the table." Granger's eyes lit up with greed. "Get it!" he snarled at the sheriff. Sheriff Alder hesitated, his eyes still on Daniel. "You get it. I'll watch the boy." Granger shot him a venomous look, but turned and stomped back into the house. It was the moment Daniel needed. He lunged, not at the sheriff, but to the side, diving behind a stack of firewood. A shotgun blast tore through the spot where he had been standing, splinters of wood flying everywhere. Daniel didn't wait. He scrambled to his feet and ran, not towards Clara, but towards the back of the house. He had to get to the well. He had to create a new target, draw them away from Clara. "He's getting away!" he heard the sheriff yell. Daniel risked a glance over his shoulder. The sheriff was running after him, reloading his shotgun. From the other side of the yard, he saw Clara take down one of the men. She saw him running, saw the sheriff chasing him. Her face was a mask of confusion and fear. She didn't know the plan. He just had to hope she'd trust him. He reached the old stone well, and without a second's hesitation, he swung his legs over the side and dropped into the darkness. He landed on a soft pile of dirt a few feet down. It was pitch black. He felt along the stone wall until his fingers found the rough opening of the tunnel. He crawled inside, the smell of damp earth filling his lungs. He could hear the sheriff shouting at the top of the well. "He's in here! Get a rope!" Daniel crawled as fast as he could. The tunnel was narrow, claustrophobic. His shoulders scraped against the sides. But he kept going, pushing forward into the darkness. He was betting everything on this tunnel, betting everything on a father he barely remembered. The tunnel opened up into the small, musty space of the storm cellar. He felt his way to the ladder and climbed, pushing open the heavy wooden trapdoor. He was inside the house, in the main room. Granger was there, frantically searching for the rock, tossing books and furniture aside. He hadn't found it. He spun around as Daniel emerged, his eyes wide with shock. "You!" Daniel didn't have time to think. He grabbed the heaviest thing he could see, a cast iron skillet from the hearth, and threw it with all his might. It caught Granger square in the side of the head. The big man crumpled to the floor, out cold. Daniel stepped over his unconscious body and ran to the front window. He saw Clara, still pinned down behind the water trough, exchanging gunfire with the last of Croft's men. And he saw Sheriff Alder, standing by the well, directing the men to find a lantern. They thought he was trapped. It was time to change the rules. Daniel took a deep breath, aimed the rifle out the window, and fired. The shot went wide, but it did what he needed it to do. It made them all stop. They all turned to look at the house. Sheriff Alder's face was a picture of disbelief. "It's a trick," he yelled. "He's still in the well." But the doubt was there. Now they were split, confused. This was Clara's chance. She took it. She burst from behind the trough, firing her pistol, providing cover fire for Daniel. Daniel fired again, and this time his shot found its mark, hitting one of the men in the shoulder. The man cried out and dropped his rifle. Now it was just the sheriff. Sheriff Alder looked from Clara, advancing on one side to the house, where shots were coming from the window. He was trapped between them. The lawman, a man who had sold his badge and his soul, made his choice. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the prairie. Silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the crackle of the burning barn and the groans of the wounded man. Daniel rushed outside and ran to Clara. She grabbed his shoulders, her eyes searching his face. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," he breathed. They stood there for a moment, in the middle of the chaos, the smoke stinging their eyes. They had survived. They had won. But Daniel knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Silas Croft was still out there. And now he knew without a doubt that the boy he'd left for dead was not only alive, but he had the one thing that could destroy him. And a man like Croft wouldn't send hired guns next time. Next time, he'd come himself. The dawn broke over a scene of devastation. The barn was a smoldering skeleton against the pale pink sky. The yard was littered with debris. Clara and Daniel worked in silence, tying up the two conscious men, including the one Daniel had shot in the shoulder. The third man, the one Clara had taken down, was dead. Granger was still unconscious inside, a massive lump on the side of his head. As the sun climbed higher, Clara made her decision. "You stay here," she said to Daniel. "Keep your rifle on these two. If Granger wakes up, tie him up too. I'm riding into town." "To do what?" Daniel asked, his voice raw from the smoke. "The sheriff's run. No one will believe us." "They don't have to believe us," Clara said, her eyes hard as flint. "They just have to believe him." She nodded towards one of the captured men. "He'll talk. Men like this, their loyalty only runs as deep as their employer's pockets. And Croft's pockets are about to run dry." She saddled her horse, her movements weary but determined. Before she rode out, she turned to Daniel. "That was a brave thing you did. Your father would have been proud." It was the first time she had ever offered him praise. It settled in his chest, a small, warm thing in the cold morning air. Daniel watched her ride down the ridge until she was just a speck. Then he turned his attention to his prisoners. He was alone, guarding 3 men, with the knowledge that a powerful, ruthless man wanted him dead. The hours crawled by. The sun grew hot. The captured men muttered threats, but Daniel ignored them. He sat on the porch step, the rifle across his knees, the silver ore a heavy weight in his pocket. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was the keeper of a promise, the guardian of a truth that had cost his family everything. Around noon, he saw a cloud of dust on the horizon. Not one rider, many. For a terrifying moment, he thought it was Croft. He thought Clara had failed. He raised the rifle, his hands steady. But as the riders got closer, he saw Clara at their head. And behind her were not hired guns, but the men of Dust Creek. Farmers, blacksmiths, ranchers. They were armed with hunting rifles and shotguns. They rode into the yard, their faces a mixture of shock at the destruction and grim resolve. A few of the men who had once laughed at the auction wouldn't meet his eyes. Clara swung down from her horse. "One of Croft's men started talking the second I mentioned a noose," she explained. "Told them everything. About the mine, about the sheriff, about Croft." A big man, the town blacksmith, stepped forward. We didn't know, Clara. We're sorry for what we let happen to you. To this boy." Clara just nodded. Sorry doesn't rebuild a barn, but it's a start. They loaded the prisoners, including a groaning, bewildered Granger, onto a wagon. They were taking them to the next county, where the law wasn't for sale. Justice was finally coming to Dust Creek. But as Daniel watched them go, he felt a prickle of unease. It was too easy. A man like Silas Croft, a man who had murdered dozens to protect his secret, wouldn't be brought down by a confession from a low-level thug. This wasn't a surrender, it was a strategic retreat. Croft was cutting his losses, letting his hired help take the fall, while he planned his next move. That evening, as the townsfolk helped douse the last embers of the fire, Daniel found Clara staring at the charred remains of the barn. "It's not over," he said. She didn't look at him. "No," she said. "It's not. He'll come for the rock," Daniel said. "He has to. It's the only real evidence against him." "I know. So what do we do?" he asked. "We can't stay here. He'll just send more men, or burn us out for good." Clara finally turned to look at him. There was a fire in her eyes that had nothing to do with the smoldering barn. It was a cold, calculated flame. "No," she said, a slow, dangerous smile touching her lips for the first time. "We're not going to wait for him to come to us." She looked north, in the direction of the Black Fork mine, in the direction of Silas Croft's empire. "He wants the rock?" she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Fine. We'll bring it to him." Daniel stared at her. Go to him? To the man who had an army of hired guns? To the heart of his power? It was suicide. But then he saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't desperation. It was strategy. She wasn't planning a surrender. She was planning an attack. They were going to walk straight into the lion's den, not as victims seeking justice, but as hunters. And Daniel realized she had been planning this for 2 years. Rescuing him wasn't the end of her plan. It was the final piece. The key she needed to unlock a door she intended to kick down. The fight wasn't over. The real war was just about to begin. They left under the cover of darkness, riding north. They didn't take the main road. Clara led them through a series of winding, forgotten trails that cut through the canyons. It was land she knew like the back of her hand. Land she had clearly traveled many times before. They rode for 2 days, speaking little, eating jerky and dry bread. On the third night, they made camp in a small hidden alcove, shielded by a waterfall. "How do you know these trails?" Daniel asked as they sat by a small, smokeless fire. "Your father and we used to explore here as kid," she said, her eyes distant. "He mapped this whole territory, not for silver or gold, just for the beauty of it. He loved this land." She pulled a worn leather map from her saddlebag. It was her brother's, the one from the chest. But this one was different. It showed the mine, but it also showed a complex network of tunnels that weren't on any official survey. "Croft thinks he owns the mountain," Clara said, tracing a line with her finger. "But my brother knew its secrets. He knew its weaknesses." She pointed to a spot on the map. "Croft's office is here, at the base of the mountain, and right beneath it. An old, forgotten ventilation shaft, too narrow for a man to fit through." Her eyes met Daniel's, but not too narrow for a boy. Daniel's blood ran cold. He understood. She wasn't planning to fight Croft's army. She was planning to bypass it. He was the weapon. He was going to sneak into the heart of the operation, right under Croft's nose. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Your father's journal," she said. "It mentions a safe in Croft's office. He kept a second ledger there, the real one. It details the insurance fraud, the bribes to the inspectors, everything. Your father saw it. That's why Croft had to kill him so quickly." The plan was insane. It was brilliant. It was their only shot. The next night, they stood on a ridge overlooking the Black Fork mine. It wasn't the dead, abandoned place Daniel remembered. It was a fortress. Floodlights cut through the darkness. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. In the center of it all was a large fortified building, Croft's office. Following the map, Clara led him to a small, unassuming cave hidden behind a tangle of thorny bushes. "This is it," she whispered. "The shaft is at the back. It will take you right into the cellar beneath his office." She placed her hands on his shoulders. "Once you have the ledger, get out the same way you came in. Don't stop for anything. I'll be waiting here. If we get separated, ride south. Don't look back." She handed him a small bundle. Inside was a candle, matches, and a knife. "I'll create a distraction on the east side of the camp," she said. "It'll draw most of the guards away. That's your window. Go." Daniel nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He crawled into the cave. The air grew cold and damp. At the back, just as the map showed, was a narrow black hole, the ventilation shaft. He took a deep breath, squeezed inside, and began his descent into the darkness, the weight of his family's legacy resting on his small shoulders. The shaft was a tight, suffocating tube of rock and earth. Daniel had to inch his way down, his back scraping against one side, his knees against the other. The air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and damp stone. After what felt like an eternity, his feet touched solid ground. He was in a small, pitch-black cellar. He fumbled for the matches and lit the candle. The small flame pushed back the darkness, revealing stone walls and a low wooden ceiling. He saw a set of stairs leading up to a trap door. He crept up the stairs, his heart hammering. He listened. Nothing. He slowly pushed the trap door open a crack. He was in a supply closet. The main office was just beyond the door. He could hear the low murmur of voices. He waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then a series of loud bangs echoed from the far side of the camp. Shouts followed, the distraction. He heard the chairs in the office scrape against the floor. "What was that?" a man's voice barked. "Go check it out, all of you." The office door opened and closed. Heavy boots stomped away. Silence. This was his chance. Daniel slipped out of the closet. The office was large and opulent, a stark contrast to the rugged world outside. A massive oak desk dominated the room. Behind it, a large iron safe was set into the stone wall. He ran to the safe. It was an old combination lock. He had no idea what the code could be. He panicked. He had come all this way, and he was going to be stopped by a lock. He ran his hands over the cold iron, thinking. His father's journal. It hadn't mentioned a combination. He looked around the desk. Papers, maps, a half-empty glass of whiskey. Then he saw it. A framed photograph on the corner of the desk. A stern-faced man with cold eyes. Silas Croft. And beside him, a young woman and a child. His family. And underneath the frame, a small engraved plaque. It had a date on it. A birthday, maybe? Or an anniversary. He tried the date on the lock. Click. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open. Inside were stacks of cash, deeds, and a single black leather-bound ledger. He grabbed it. He was just about to close the safe when something else caught his eye. A small wooden box tucked in the back. The same kind of box his mother used to keep her jewelry in. On impulse, he grabbed it too. He had the ledger. He had to go. He ran back to the closet, down the stairs, and into the cellar. He was just about to enter the ventilation shaft when he heard the office door slam open above him. "The safe!" a voice roared. It was Croft. "He's been here! Seal the camp! Nobody gets out!" Daniel didn't wait. He scrambled into the shaft and began the desperate, frantic climb back up. He could hear alarms blaring across the compound now. Shouts from every direction. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming. He finally reached the top and tumbled out into the cave, gasping for air. He could see the chaos below. Guards running everywhere. Lanterns sweeping across the hillsides. He looked for Clara. She was gone. He was alone. He remembered her words. "If we get separated, ride south. Don't look back." He found the spot where they had tied the horses. Her horse was gone. Only his remained. She had left him a path to escape. He jumped into the saddle, the ledger and the small wooden box clutched tight in his hand, and rode as fast as he could into the dark, unforgiving wilderness. The entire weight of Silas Croft's empire now hunting him. He rode all night, pushing the horse to its limit, the sounds of the pursuit growing fainter behind him. When the sun rose, he was deep in the canyons, lost and alone. He finally let the exhausted horse rest and took shelter in a small overhang of rock. He opened the ledger. It was all there. Page after page of coded numbers and names, detailing every crime, every bribe, every life Croft had destroyed to build his fortune. This was the proof. This would bring him down. Then he remembered the small wooden box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a silver locket. He opened it. On one side was a tiny portrait of his mother, Sarah. On the other, a portrait of his father, Thomas. And tucked behind his father's picture was a tiny, folded piece of paper. He carefully unfolded it. It was a letter, in his father's handwriting. "My dearest Clara," it began, "if you are reading this, it means Croft has succeeded. He is not just a thief, he is a monster. But his weakness is his pride. He keeps the real ledger in his safe. The combination is his daughter's birthday, 0814 or 18. I have made another discovery, something far more important than silver. Hidden deep in the mountain is a network of caves, and in them, ancient drawings. Proof that this land was sacred to the tribes that came before us. This is a protected place. Croft is not just desecrating a mountain. He is desecrating a historical site. The federal marshals must be notified. The evidence is with the old prospector Jedediah, who lives by the Whispering Falls. He knows the truth. Trust him. Protect my son. Avenge us. Daniel sat stunned. A new layer of the truth had just been revealed. The date on the picture frame. It hadn't been a guess. It had been a message left by his father for him. He had led him to the combination, and there was more evidence. A witness. Jedediah. He wasn't just running anymore. He had a destination, a mission. But as he looked out from his hiding place, he saw them. Two riders on the ridge opposite, silhouetted against the morning sun. They had found his trail. He had to move. He packed the ledger and the locket away and mounted his horse. He had to find the Whispering Falls. He had to find Jedediah. He urged his horse on, deeper into the maze of canyons. He could hear the riders behind him, their calls echoing off the rock walls. They were closing in. He pushed his horse faster, the animal's breath coming in ragged gasps. The trail opened into a small box canyon, a dead end. He was trapped. The two riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon, blocking his only exit. They were craftsmen. They slowly advanced, rifles raised. "Nowhere to go, kid," one of them sneered. "Hand over the book." Daniel's hand went to the pistol Clara had given him. It was one gun against two. He was outmatched, but he wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to let his father's sacrifice be for nothing. He raised the pistol, his hands shaking but his resolve firm. And then a voice echoed from the rocks above them. "I'd drop those rifles if I were you." Everyone looked up. Standing on the cliff edge was Clara, and she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by a dozen men. Tough, grim-faced men Daniel had never seen before. They were armed to the teeth. Croft's men hesitated, their eyes wide. "Who the hell are you?" one of them stammered. Clara smiled. It was a terrifying sight. "We're the men whose minds Croft stole," she said. "The families whose lives he destroyed. We're the ghosts he thought he buried. And we've been waiting a long time for this." The final battle for the Black Fork mine had begun. Not in a town, not in a courtroom, but here, in the heart of the land Croft had stolen. And at the center of it all was a boy who had once been worth only a single silver dollar. If you've been on the edge of your seat with Daniel and Clara's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because what they did next changed the West forever. What becomes of the ones no one wanted? They become the ones everyone fears.